Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, dwyervip.com. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now let's think about our own lives. No doubt many people here watching this video love their jobs, right? Love their jobs. They love going to work. They love their co-workers, right? Many of you might not love your jobs. Maybe the boss is a bit of a problem, right? Maybe the co-workers have stabbed you in the back before. Maybe you're there just for a paycheck. But understand both groups. The group that loves their job and the group that isn't thrilled with the job, right? If they were to win the lottery, members of both groups, many of them would never go back to their job, right? You suddenly win $10 million, right? $20 million, $25 million. And I'm just telling you, many of us are going to say, you know what? This is going to change my life. I'm never working again, right? Where's the beach? Where's the martini, right? Where's the music? Where's the warm weather? That's where I'm going to be, right? You could even handle walking down the street and having someone come up to you and saying, hey man, I hear you quit your job. Hey, you were highly regarded at your job. You were about to take over the business. And many of us would be comfortable in saying, hey, it's okay. If you want to view me as a quitter, I think I'll live. You know, take over the business. That's all right. I'm doing okay. I'm good, right? Well, let me just tell you, the same way if many of us won the lottery, we would hit the beach, right? We would not hit the office. I'm just telling you, that's the way many boxers see it, right? Boxers are people just like us. A boxer gets a windfall, and that guy might just leave the sport. Well, I believe right now you're looking at a fight that I consider a retirement fight. Somebody is gonna retire after the Vladimir Klitschko Anthony Joshua fight. And let me offer a little bit of breathing room here. When I say retire, that fight's going to be the end of their careers as an elite fighter. Now, maybe I could easily see Vladimir Klitschko, should he lose, having another fight in front of his home country, right? Some fighters like to have that last fight after they know they've left the stage, right? That last fight against a beatable opponent, that victory lap on their career, right? But for all intents and purposes, that guy's retired. In other words, after this fight, I'm expecting either one of these guys to never fight again, never, ever, or to announce that they're only going to have one more fight. And that fight's going to be a Mickey Mouse deal against a goofy opponent in some venue of their choice. Now let's talk about it, right? Understand that the Klitschko-Joshua fight is going to have a crowd of about 90,000 people watching the fight, right? 90,000. Let me also say this too. I've been here online talking about how pay-per-view is dead in boxing. But understand there is an exception to the rule, right? It's for that rare, unique fight that captures the imagination, right? Mayweather-Pacquiao, right? If it's a fight like that, if Mike Tyson were to come back and fight Lennox Lewis, right? And if those two guys were credible these days, people would come out on the pay-per-view. I believe this fight is going to make a mint on the pay-per-view. You cannot compare this fight to Golovkin-Jacobs, less than 200,000 pay-per-view. Right? Ward-Kovalev, less than 200,000 pay-per-view. No. This fight's not those fights. This fight is big money. Right? Big money. I'm expecting huge pay-per-view. So as paid as these guys are going to look when you're looking at the telecast and you see the places packed to the rafters and you're hearing that, you know, the crowd is bigger than any crowd in the UK for a boxing match in the post-World War II era. As paid as you think the guys are going to be, looking at the crowd, and keep in mind, those tickets are expensive, folks. The guys are going to be even more paid than that. Because, in my opinion, at least 1 million more people are going to be watching on the pay-per-view in multi-countries. Right? Vladimir Klitschko is box office gold in Germany, folks. Gold. Right? You can't do better than Anthony Joshua's unbeaten record heavyweight championship. I believe no one's gone the distance with Anthony Joshua. So this fight's a moment in time. The money is gonna be, to quote Donald Trump, huge. So, let's go back in time. If they're fortunate with this fight, 30 years from now, 30, we'll still be talking about it. They'll still be asking elite fighters who actually won the fight. Right? We'll still be amazed at the numbers on the fight. Well, let's talk about an event that took place 30 years ago, which was, in hindsight, also a retirement fight. You had one of the dominant middleweights in history, Marvelous Marvin Hagler. That was his legal name. Right? Marvelous Marvin Hagler. And he was fighting a guy coming off eye surgery who had been out of the game for 3 years, but who had been himself involved in some of the biggest fights in recent boxing history. Sugar Ray Leonard. Right? Now, understand, that fight is controversial. I know that some outfits sat down a bunch of current fighters, right? Young guys. I believe Shakur Stevenson was one of them, and asked them to score Hagler-Leonard, right? It's a close fight. And apparently the young guys, they were leaning toward Leonard, as the judges did that night, right? I'm just telling you. And keep in mind, I was a big Ray Leonard fan back in the 80s, right? Huge. But I'm just telling you that if you watch that fight, right? Let's give older guys some credit. If people who aren't in their early 20s, if you've actually watched the sport for a few years, right? If you actually have some grays, if you can remember who the champion was 10 years ago, if you go back and if you watch Hagler-Leonard and if you look at the body shots, an argument can be made that Marvin Hagler won the fight. Understand, neither fighter that night should have felt outclassed. Both guys had their moment, right? In our dreams, we hope that Klitschko Joshua lives up to Hagler-Leonard, right? For it to do so, it would have to go the distance. And we would have to be in suspense as they total the scorecards. So understand, both Leonard and Hagler had an obviously huge payday. I mean, beyond huge payday for the rematch, right? The first fight was financial gold. Even with all the money they paid the fighters. It made big bucks. And it delivered. It was a classic. We're still talking about it now 30 years later, 2 generations later. So all these guys had to do to get the big money again on a proven box office winner was to sign the contract for the rematch. Marvin Hagler in the 80s got paid $19 million for that fight. $19 million. Hagler at first wanted an immediate rematch, just like Sergei Kovalev. Ray Leonard, 30 years ago, doing his best Andre Ward impersonation, was a little bit slow to agree to a date for the rematch. Marvin Hagler then, with his girl, moved to Italy. Right, folks? It was over. Marvin Hagler was retired. So, today is April the 6th, 2017. I'm saying the date because there's a great article on boxingscene.com about what actually happened, why the rematch didn't take place. Right? Understand, boxing is like being in the military. It's like being in boot camp. Right? These fighters are getting weighed. They have to meet certain criteria. They have to go through testing. There's boxing commissions out there. The guy has to be in big shape. There are people around him, trainers, right? Guys who are not going to take any mess. Virgil Hunter, John David Jackson, Robert Garcia, Nacho Beristain, Freddie Roach, right? Who need to know, they need to know that their fighter is mentally and physically plugged in. Abel Sanchez, right? These guys are like drill sergeants, aren't they? Right? Abel Sanchez had Sergei Kovalev as one of the guys in his group. And you know the rest. Even with the obvious talent Kovalev had, right? I'm sure Abel Sanchez saw the punching power and thought, wow, yeah, right? But you know what? Kovalev didn't honor the code, right? It's like a military code. He wasn't diligent enough. Even with obvious money being his trainer, Abel Sanchez wasn't going to have it, right? This is the drill sergeant mentality. You leave boxing, you make that mental break from boxing. You leave boot camp and you're out on the beach drinking martinis, or you're in Italy and you're with your girl hanging by the Mediterranean, thinking of starring in Italian movies like Marvin Hagler was. And going back to boxing even at 32, folks, that's how old he was. Young guy, right? Around Deontay Wilder's age right now. Right? Marvin Hagler had millions ahead of him. Had several years left. This is a guy who's at the top of the middleweight mountain. And Marvin Hagler decided, no, I'm not coming back. I'm retired. So let me read from Boxing Scene's article that's published today, April 6, 2017. If you're looking at this video several months from now, I want you to Google this article. It's an article on the Hagler-Leonard rematch, why it didn't happen. And they quote a good source, Hagler's promoter, Bob Arum. Right now, if anybody would be interested in a multi-million-dollar rematch, if anybody knows how to monetize a multi-million-dollar rematch, it's Bob Arum. So, here's Bob Arum's quote on why the Hagler rematch didn't take place. Right? I'm reading. I remember a year later at Caesars, they were having a big dinner to honor the fighters who had fought there, Arum said. And it was really a salute to boxing. And at that dinner, they had Muhammad Ali there. I was there. Thomas the Hitman Hearns was there. Ray, Marvin, Roberto Duran. And Ray called me over and he says, Bob, go speak to him, meaning Hagler, and says, let's do the rematch. It'll do a fortune of business. So I went over and I talked to Marvin. And I said, Marvin, Ray asked me to come talk to you about doing the rematch. And Marvin looked at me with that scowl that he had. And he said, tell that guy to go get a life. Right, folks, he was done. He was out. Right, now let's talk about Klitschko, Joshua. Now let's be real here. I don't care what the current narrative is and stuff like that. We all have our opinions. We should all go with what we see. Right? In my opinion, there's simply no way. None. Zero. Zip. Nada. That Anthony Joshua outboxes Vladimir Klitschko. If you believe Anthony Joshua wins this fight, and he's the favorite, right? Beats me how, but he's the favorite. Okay, whatever. I'm outvoted. Joshua's the favorite. If you believe he wins, then in my opinion, you necessarily believe that he drops Vladimir Klitschko. That the only way this fight goes the distance is if Joshua drops Vladimir Klitschko multiple times, and Vladimir Klitschko spends a huge portion of the fight holding on, just trying to survive. Right? There's no other way this fight goes the distance with Anthony Joshua winning. Right? He's not going to be up on his toes, outboxing Vladimir Klitschko. You're not going to be there with a scorecard saying, round 1, Joshua, round 2, Joshua, round 3, Joshua. Then reach the point where you're in rounds 8, 9, and 10, where Joshua's never been, 11 and 12, and you're saying, well, who won that round? You know, Joshua behind a jab movement, or Joshua inside, bobbing and weaving, landing punches, outboxed Vladimir Klitschko. Right? That's not the Joshua wins narrative. Right? The Joshua wins narrative is up, flags down. The ref said 8, he's not moving, this fight's over. Or Vladimir Klitschko gets off the canvas glassy-eyed. Right? And the ref looks at him and says, you all right to fight? And Vladimir Klitschko still looks glassy-eyed. Right? So, Vladimir Klitschko's 41 years old. Right? He's 41. Folks, he has money in the bank. Lord knows if he had no money in the bank, the brother's going to get a boatload of money off this fight, isn't he? So you're telling me a 41-year-old has just been knocked out. Knocked out. Beaten badly. Stopped by a young champion in his 20s who will never have to fight him again, right? If the fight's convincing. if Vladimir Klitschko, the old fighter, is knocked out, dominated, then there's no reason for a rematch. So at that point, Vladimir Klitschko, who has been heavyweight champion for years, at that point, Klitschko has no incentive to continue his career. Right? It's a dangerous sport. He would be in his 40s. Right? He would no longer have legitimacy as the elite heavyweight on the planet because Joshua would be able to not fight him again. As long as Joshua is champion, Vladimir Klitschko couldn't demand a rematch if he gets dominated in this fight. So in my opinion, looking at the money, looking at the fact that the guy's a relatively recent dad, looking at the age, looking at the fact that he's coming off a loss against Tyson Fury, understand it's not just Klitschko, it's not just Joshua, who, if he remains champion, could avoid Vladimir Klitschko. if Tyson Fury comes back and wins the title again? Right? Just think it through. We would view Tyson Fury as a guy who would then be two-time heavyweight champion, who would have already beaten Vladimir Klitschko. Right? So in my opinion, Klitschko at 41 wouldn't have any reason to continue fighting. Right? For Klitschko, to me, it would be a retirement fight. He'd be like Marvin Hagler. Right? He'd be by some beach, you know, some warm body of water, Mediterranean, wherever, living his life, knowing that he had one hell of a run. Now, I believe most of you understand that. Understand this might be the last time we see Klitschko. I could see Klitschko saying, okay, I'm retired, but I'm going to fight this goofy person who has some credibility in front of my hometown fans because I want that victory lap. But understand, those kind of fights are really fights in retirement, aren't they? In other words, if Klitschko loses, this is the last time Klitschko fights for the heavyweight title. That's even with Tom, Dick, and Harry having shares of the heavyweight title right now. Now, the more intriguing thing, where I lose credibility with many of you, and that's okay, let's face it. You know, some videos are going to seem in left field because, in my opinion, sometimes reality's in left field. Is the idea that Anthony Joshua, in his prime, what is he, 27 years old, could possibly think about walking away from the sport. Now let's talk about how Anthony Joshua could lose this fight. This is a guy who, what, hasn't made it to the 8th round or 9th round? In other words, he hasn't made it to the last third of this scheduled 12-rounder. Right? Anthony Joshua's title defenses have come against people like Dominique Brazil. Right? I mean, you know, he hasn't really fought that big name where you thought, wow, this is a big name. Has he? He's an untested champion. Also, let's face it, we talk about military boot camp. Guys who are watching what they eat, who are always training. Isn't that this guy? You know you don't come close to the physique this guy has unless you're spending hours in the gym. If any of us were asked to compete against this guy in 6 months at a bodybuilding contest, oh, I'd say 99.99% of us would have a hell of a lot of work to do. Right? You know, this guy is always training. You know, while you're at McDonald's saying, yeah, I'll take the Big Mac. You know what? Let me get that with the large fry. Right? No Diet Cola for me. I'll take the Coke. Right? While most of us are doing that, you know Joshua's not in McDonald's. Right? You know that's not happening. So my point to you is this. This guy has lived a hard life, hasn't he? There's a lot of work. A lot of work that goes into becoming Olympic gold medalists. Right? Your boys are running the streets. They're hitting the pubs. They're getting with beautiful women. They're staying out late at night. These are the guys who you went to high school with. And what are you doing? You're traveling around with your country's boxing team. You're getting hit in the face by older men from Eastern European countries. Right? You're then, you know, trying to qualify by winning tournaments and making your country's team and then, you know, qualifying for the Olympics. That's hard work. Then, of course, the guy follows that up with being the corporate heavyweight champion, right? He signs with Eddie Hearn. He's saying the right things. He's fighting, you know, the right opponents. He's on TV. He's building a crowd. Folks, that's a lot of work. Let's just say I personally prefer the Carlos Monzon lifestyle, where I'm out running the streets and stuff like that, the Mike Tyson late at night up in Harlem at Dapper Dan lifestyle, where you're out, you're living life, you're only young once, you're in your early 20s, and then they say, hey, you got to fight this guy in a few months, and then you get yourself ready. Joshua, to me, has been living a different lifestyle, a Spartan lifestyle, a military lifestyle. So now you're telling me this brother's going to get all this money. All this money. Now let's say Cinderella, 12 o'clock strikes. He's in the ring and suddenly there's the realization that he's not in Vladimir Klitschko's league. That there's a part of the experience of a championship heavyweight fighter that he hasn't had. Let's say he looks around the heavyweight division. Let's say he's out there and he's getting hit with a much stiffer, much harder jab than he got hit with when he was sparring with Vladimir Klitschko. Let's say Vladimir Klitschko starts throwing the kind of right hands he threw against Kubrat Pulev. And let's say Anthony Joshua gets hurt in a way that he's never been hurt in his professional boxing career. Right? I'm guessing many of you right now are asking the obvious question. Has he ever been hurt in his professional boxing career? Understand there is a scenario. It's actually the one I see playing out, where Anthony Joshua doesn't just lose. He gets undressed. He gets stopped. He gets exposed. One of the worst words in boxing. Now, if you're Anthony Joshua and you have been heavyweight champion, you have won all of your fights by knockout, and suddenly, in the marathon of your career, you understand that you're not there looking at the finish line, but you actually have another 12, 13 miles to go to get to where Vladimir Klitschko is today. Right? If he gets blown out by Vladimir Klitschko, I'm just telling you, in my opinion, this young guy might just walk away from the sport. Folks, this is dangerous. This is not just military. This is military at war. No doubt Anthony Joshua has spoken to great fighters who are older, who are retired, who have slurred speech. He knows the risks involved in boxing. Some of these fighters have been hit with bullets, so to speak, figuratively. Right? If he understands, if he comes to the realization that he's not there yet, if he looks around and he sees Deontay Wilder, big puncher, if he sees Luis Ortiz, skill set inside that Joshua may not have, if he sees some of the other guys, Joseph Parker, still unbeaten, right? A lot of guys who are hungry. I believe he knows. Dylan White threw out his shoulder toward the end of the first round where Dylan White was giving him problems. If Joshua feels that his period of dominance that he's had right now can't be duplicated in the future, if he feels that in a sense he's Ronda Rousey, only with boxing gloves, well, after hitting the big leagues with this payday, after rewarding all of the people around him, promoter, manager, trainer, sparring partners, etc., right? Knowing that no one can take away the fact that he's been heavyweight champion, Why would he continue fighting? Put a different way, didn't Ronda Rousey make a mistake by fighting that last match? Folks, if you've been dominant and you lose your last match, if you quit, that's the only loss of your career. We don't see you get exposed later. Question: Mike Tyson's legacy. If he had quit right after the Buster Douglas fight, let's say you're Mike Tyson. If you lost to Buster Douglas, right, would you have continued fighting if you got a financial windfall for that fight? Right? If you were given financial security after the Buster Douglas fight, and if you quit, would you expect your legacy to be greater or less than Tyson's legacy today? Isn't the problem with Tyson's legacy today the fact that we remember him biting Evander Holyfield's ear? We remember him getting stopped by Lennox Lewis. We remember him getting stopped by Evander Holyfield. We remember him getting stopped by Kevin McBride. Right? Would his legacy be greater today if he would have simply walked away after the Buster Douglas fight, knowing that many people would feel that that was an off night? Right? That fight had irregularities. You know the way boxing fans are. They'll dissect and analyze a classic fight. So there's always the issue of, was the count too long when Buster Douglas was on the canvas? Should the ref have stopped the fight when Buster Douglas was on the canvas? Right? If you're a hardcore Tyson fan, you also say, where was the end swell in Tyson's corner? Right? I'm just telling you, in my opinion, had Tyson retired after the Buster Douglas fight, I believe he would have at least the legacy that he has today, because we remember dominant runs. Jack Dempsey, look at his record. We remember him. It's been 90 years, folks. 90 years. Jack Dempsey's dominance wasn't for that long a period of time. He's fighting like once or twice a year. Then he loses to Gene Tunney. Then they have the rematch. Then he's out of the sport. Right? Well, all I'm saying to you is, if I'm Anthony Joshua, and if I come to the realization that there might be other guys out here who might be able to beat me, that there are parts of my game that are underdeveloped at 27, that I might not have the stamina to go 12 rounds with a fighter in his 40s. Right? Then why wouldn't I walk away? Why wouldn't I do what Marvin Hagler suggested Ray Leonard do? Tell that guy to get a life. Right? I expect the loser of this Klitschko-Joshua fight to walk away from the sport of boxing. Right? I believe this is a retirement fight. I think we need to look at this fight carefully. Right? If the loser knows finances and stuff like that, he might realize, look, in these times, maybe I should convert my money to gold. Right? You know, maybe I should go invest in real estate someplace. So if these central banks continue to have economies collapsing left and right? Greece, Italy. Look at the French election. If the EU is completely disintegrating, right? The UK is gone from the EU. I'm guessing France might be gone before too long. Right? Why would I stay in the sport and continue to incur expenses when I can cash out now and set myself up for what's coming economically. Anyway, that's how I see it. Let me hear from you. I'm particularly interested in the crowd that's going to say, no, Joshua's going to continue fighting, right? And the crowd that's going to say, why would anyone walk away when they have a financial windfall if they just agree to further matches? And my answer to you is the same reason Marvin Hagler at 32, 9 years younger than Klitschko right here, walked away. Let me add this too. I know I'm going to get emails. I know I'm going to get comments here saying, well, Klitschko got beaten before and he continued. His brother Vitaly, who was heavyweight champion, told him to quit the sport after the Corey Sanders loss. But this is a different moment in Klitschko's life, isn't it? Right? Klitschko has had the dominant run. Klitschko has had years of being heavyweight champion now. He's in his 40s now. Right? He's proven now. So if he gets blown out here, even though there'd be paydays, you can imagine, Deontay Wilder would like nothing better than to take on a guy with a name who's gonna be box office to try to validate himself, to say, hey, I've done what Joshua and Tyson Fury have done. Right? I imagine the winner of Parker Fury would feel the same way. Fighters would want the Klitschko validation, but there'd be nothing in it for Klitschko. Right? Nothing at all. So, I'm expecting the loser of this fight to walk away from the sport the way I see the fight. I expect the loser to be Anthony Joshua. Right? As I've said, the same way many of us would leave our jobs if we win the lottery. I believe some of these boxers will leave their jobs if they lose in a way where they come to the realization that they're not as good as they thought they were, or that they're past their prime now. That's how I see it. Let me hear from you. I hope you leave your comments in the comment section to this video. Thanks for stopping by.